I want to thank everyone for coming to our Defense One leadership briefing with Air Force Secretary Deborah James. Before we begin, I want to thank our exclusive underwriter of today's event, Amazon Web Services. And a few announcements. Please silence your cell phones as always, but leave them on. Feel free to tweet and share your thoughts and maybe even try to sneak a question if we can get it to Marcus. We have a hashtag. It's Def1LeaderChats, DEFONE Leader Chats. And we'll bring on now Marcus Weisgerber, our global business editor, and Deborah James for these series. A quick word about the series. This is a spin-off from an earlier series that Government Executive, our parent division here at Atlantic Media, used to run, called their Leadership Breakfast Series, which would bring in people like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or the FAA, administrator, different leaders from around the government. And we wanted to restart it with Defense One as a real way for different leaders in the military and the national security community to talk about really how they do their jobs in these challenging times that we're in. We all know things are changing rapidly. We keep hearing that there are more threats from more places coming at us than ever before. So to have these jobs, I'm sure is quite a daunting task. And with everything from budgets to news cycles to 100-degree heat and reporters like Marcus, they never know what they're going to have to deal with on any given day. So this is Deborah James's day to talk about the Air Force, and I can't think of another reporter who knows more about the Air Force than Air Force issues and everything about it than Marcus Weisgerber. So please give them a round of applause, and let's have a good show. Yep.
Good morning, everybody. I won't bore everyone with introductions since everyone knows who our speaker is, and we're delighted to have you here today. Thanks all for coming out to our beautiful offices with the view that you can kind of sort of not see. So,
sorry, I'm having a malfunction already.
Okay.
Put this behind me. There we go.
There we go. So the secretary just returned from a trip across that I don't think was publicized to most of Eastern Europe, to a lot of countries in Eastern Europe, to Ukraine being one of them, and Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and some other non-Eastern Europe but European countries. Tell us a little bit about what those countries are thinking about right now and kind of what they're wanting from the U.S. There's been so much talk about Article 5 these days in the presidential campaign. What are they telling you?
Well, first of all, Marcus, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone who turned out this morning to have this discussion about the importance of the United States Air Force, some of our issues, and thanks for bringing up that recent trip. It didn't get coverage here in the United States, but if I may say so for myself, I think I knocked it out of the park on Latvian TV. Thank you. Thank you. I did do an interview, and when I saw it after the fact, it was dubbed. So I couldn't, of course, remember what I had said at the time, but it sounded pretty good in Latvian. But it was a remarkable trip. It was 10 days, 8 countries. You mentioned some of them, but in all it included countries that are right on the border with Russia, to include the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I visited Bulgaria, Portugal, Iceland. It was a variety of countries, 8 countries in all in 10 days. And a remarkable week, I might add, because during that period in Europe, we saw the tremendous destruction in Nice, the terrorist attack in Nice, France, and then that was also when the attempted coup occurred in Turkey. So it was quite a timely period to be in Europe. Russia is very much on the minds of our allies. It was a reminder to me once again that where you stand depends on where you sit. That is to say, location, location, location. Those who are closest to the Russian border have the greatest concerns. Indeed, they are making their 2% commitment in defense spending for NATO. Those who are somewhat farther away, they're concerned as well, but they're also concerned about terrorism and other issues. So, of course, we talked about both areas. We talked about the European Reassurance Initiative. We talked about joint training between our air forces. And, of course, along the way, I visited with our airmen at every stop where they were located.
Is there any concern that the U.S. is abandoning the region at all? This has been kind of it was a concern prior to the European Reassurance Initiative, and then it's come up again. A few of the defense ministers over there have said, we would like to see the reassurance initiative put in the base budget because that shows stability and long-term commitment. But I guess, was there any concern of an abandonment?
I would say no. Of course, every country would like more United States. They would like more United States Air Force, United States Army, etc. I was able to tour some of the locations where the European Reassurance Initiative dollars would go toward construction projects. For example, Ameri, Estonia was one such location. So all of the countries are appreciative of the NATO commitment, particularly the U.S. commitment. All would like to see more. All are very, very concerned about Russian exercises in the area. I questioned or asked some of the leaders, particularly in the Baltic states, about the phenomena of the so-called little green men, and are they at all concerned about that possibly occurring in their countries? I determined, just based on what they said, that that was less of a concern. The greater concern were the SNAP exercises, meaning the unannounced exercises that Russia sometimes conducts. That this could present the opportunity to not simply exercise, but to move into their territory. So they're watchful, they're mindful, they're concerned.
Talk about Ukraine. I think you're the most senior Defense Department official to go to Ukraine, because I don't believe the Secretary or the Deputy Defense Secretary have been there. What were the type of things that they were asking for these days, and do you see increased exercises on the horizon, perhaps, with them? And do you see us getting to a point where we're selling them, substantial arms, fighter jets, and cargo planes, etc.?
First of all, what the Deputy Minister of Defense impressed upon me in Ukraine, and by the way, I was impressed generally with those that I met there, they are ready, willing, and able to fight for their own country. So they stand absolutely prepared to do that, and in fact, they are doing that. They are grateful and hope that they will continue to have support from the United States in the ways that we have been doing. And of course, we have, I think, approximately $600 million to date over several years now, has gone to non-lethal sorts of assistance and provisions of different equipment, non-lethal. We had discussions about additional types of training that we might be able to provide to them. And of course, we have extensive training programs in the Air Force. It had been a particularly bad week or two in the Ukraine when I arrived. They had had renewed fighting. There had been ceasefire violations. There had been additional loss of life and destruction. They showed me black and white photos, for example, some of the towns and cities in the Donbass region where a lot of this is occurring. And it reminded me of photos of World War II. Bombed out buildings, just total destruction. So it's a tragedy what's going on.
To shift away maybe from Ukraine for a second, let's talk about, or more than a second, let's talk about ISIS. Let's talk about the air war that the Air Force is shouldering the brunt of. Talk about just the stress this is having on the Air Force. I remember 10 years ago hearing, but when the aircraft were not flying at the pace that they're flying at now, back when Afghanistan and Iraq were hotter, than that the Air Force was flying the wings off of its planes. Is that happening now? How deployments of airmen, how are they responding to these, I guess, more robust deployments than they've had?
Well, we certainly have a number of dynamics happening all at once, and you've touched upon a couple of them, Marcus. So first of all, we're the smallest Air Force that we've been in our history. We are the oldest in terms of the age of our aircraft. So when you say that we're flying and we're using our aircraft more and more, that's true, and they're older, which has all kinds of implications for maintenance and other things. A smaller Air Force means that we have to deploy our people more frequently, which is arduous. It's family separations. It's hard on people. But with that said, our people are doing a fantastic job. They are pumped in terms of the importance of the mission. They know that they're making a big difference. But again, it's a situation of strain that we are trying through a variety of mechanisms to alleviate. And of course, the fact that we have the budget crunch doesn't help matters, because we can't afford to do everything and choices have to be made. We put our readiest forces forward, of course, but that means we have undermanning and other issues to deal with here with the forces in the United States. So all of this we need to keep working on.
How long can the Air Force sustain this type of pace?
Well, the Air Force's job, of course, is to step up to the plate whenever we are asked to do so by the President of the United States. I would say, however, that for us to be able to sustain such a pace and to do it in a way that would be healthier for the force, what we need to do is we need to continue to modestly grow our force. And of course, we are on a trajectory to do that. So that's very, very important. We need to continue to fund our readiness accounts appropriately. And we also need to get on with it in a more stepped up fashion when it comes to modernizing our Air Force.
Let's talk about the shortage. One of the things you have a shortage of is pilots. You wrote an op-ed for us a few weeks ago. I believe it's 700 pilots. Kevin and I joked that it's 698 because we're ready to come and fly should you need us.
I have recall authority, you know.
So you can waive the age restriction then for each of us. Perfect. How are you getting after that pilot shortage? How do you plan to alleviate it?
Well, it's a several-pronged approach. There's no silver bullet. There's no single answer. So first of all, the civilian airlines are hiring, and the pay differential is substantial. So we are working with the Congress to try to increase the bonus authority for our pilots in the future. The bonus authority that we currently have hasn't been raised since the year 1999. So it has fallen behind standard, and so looking to increase the compensation is one thing, but it's only one thing. Pay is important, but it is by no means everything. The other thing we're trying to do is the pace of deployments is high, as I mentioned earlier, and so what that means is when pilots and units are home, they need to have good quality time at home, where they have a reasonable pace, where they can be with their families, where they can do some professional development and some home station flying and training as appropriate. So we need to work on doing a better job of those, I'll say, quality of life and home station issues as well. Another factor that we want to work on, and we are, is trying to strip away some of the additional duties that we place upon our people. So that is to say, to free them up to be able to focus more on their primary job, as well as have some of that important quality of life and not be bogged down with so many additional duties. So that's some of what we're doing. It's a comprehensive approach to get at this problem.
Something I just thought of when you were saying that, it's something it's sometimes criticized, but throughout sequestration, a lot of the activities, namely flyovers of baseball games and football games and the Thunderbirds, that stuff all was stopped. And is something like that, has that hurt the ability to recruit pilots, perhaps?
Well, I don't know that that alone has hurt the ability to recruit pilots. We don't have as much of a recruitment problem as we have a retention problem, and we also have a training and throughput problem. So that's another thing that we're trying to do to address our pilot shortage, is we're trying to amp up how many pilots we produce in a given year. So we have a variety of approaches there. So it's less of a recruitment issue, it's much more of a retaining issue and a production issue as well.
Another area where you have a shortage and you're trying to grow is in the area of drones, remotely piloted aircraft pilots. Talk about where you are. There's this whole Get Well plan that the Air Force announced a few years back. Where is that right now? When do you see yourself getting to a point where you're not as stressed?
Well, first of all, the requirement for ISR, and that is produced in part by the field of the RPA, that requirement has gone up, year after year after year. And so what has happened is we have been increasing our force, but we've never been able to increase and keep up with this growing requirement, which means we don't have enough people to do the work. We just keep working the people harder and harder. So that's a vicious circle, and we said we got to have a bit of a timeout here and do a Get Well plan. So there's various components to that Get Well plan. First of all, we did get permission for a brief period of time to do fewer combat air patrols. Others within the joint force will step up and take up that slack in the short term. Another area is we're using our Guard and Reserve more. We're calling up our Guard and Reserve to come and to assist. We're using civilian contractors for certain elements of the mission, not strike missions, but some elements of training. and the like. We're also ramping up, as part of our growth of end strength, we want to bring on more RPA folks into the force. And once again, quality of life is terribly important. And so over time, we project that we will have other bases where the RPA force can rotate to. Right now, there's only a small number of bases. To expand that number in the future as we expand the force is something that we think will also address quality of life.
One area is you've just announced that enlisted will be able to fly some drones. Do you see that possibly expanding, and if so, how would they be, I guess, characterized? Do they get wings? Do they not get wings? And does the Air Force go to kind of a structure like the Army has with warrant officers, perhaps?
Well, what we're doing is we're opening up to the enlisted force the world of piloting for the Global Hawk. At the moment, that's our focus because it's something new, and when you try something new, I'm a believer in crawl, walk, run. Do it, learn your lessons, do it well, and then look at expanding down the line. So that's our approach. I absolutely do see possibilities for further expansion beyond Global Hawk, but again, I think it's prudent when you start something new to start with something what I call crawl, walk, run. The enlisted force, of course, would be receiving basic pay according to their rank, but in terms of any bonuses, things like that, it would be equalized. So they would get the same thing that another RPA pilot would get in the way of any sort of a bonus, that sort of an incentive. As far as warrant officers, now we did look at that and we decided that was not necessary. We have a fantastic enlisted force, enlisted system as it is. To institute a warrant officer program, though it's doable, it would require a certain amount of overhead, and we sort of didn't see the cost-benefit analysis. It didn't come out in favor of going in that direction.
And what about, and you mentioned contractors in there, flying the non-strike missions. Are contractors perhaps an option for other areas of which you're short right now, maintenance, just other Air Force functions, non-kinetic, if you will, to help alleviate some of the pressure you have from that smaller force?
Well, certainly contractors already are a key partner in almost all areas, including maintenance. So we are using contractors in the maintenance arena right now. So looking at expanding that is certainly a possibility in other venues.
I wanted to shift to the KC-46 and the new tanker. I guess it got some good news recently. Well, probably not the greatest. I guess, how confident are you right now in that program, in its ability to actually deliver these planes and actually do what they're supposed to do?
Well, it's coming along, and as you know, I'm sure the audience is aware that there's been going to be a delay in the contractual requirement known as the RAA. It's about a 5-month or so delay. So we're working with Boeing right now to figure out what that means and appropriate follow-up because of that delay.
And RAA is just that Boeing has to deliver 18 planes by a certain date. They're supposed to deliver them by August of next year, and it's going to get pushed to January, I believe. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. We could use you in the Pentagon. That was very good, Marcus. That was very good.
Making sure everybody understands.
Yes. So we're working with Boeing on what that means and the aftermath. As you know, the program is a developmental program, so things happen and fixes need to occur. The most recent issue was the axial boom loads. This was not coming along appropriately. However, there's been hardware as well as software fixes of late, and now it has completed the testing on approximately 6 different types of aircraft, which was the requirement. And so it's leading up to a milestone C decision probably mid-August. I'm not aware of anything that would block that. So, of course, you don't know until you know, and things can still crop up. But I would say it's looking pretty good for a milestone C decision in August.
Another thing that looked good, I was just in England 2 weeks ago for the Farnborough Air Show, and the F-35 made its debut at the air show. Everyone seemed very happy with the fact that it was there this go around. You have an IOC decision looming, I guess. When is that expected right now? And how do you even go about announcing? I remember I was trying to think back to the last time an IOC was declared, and I want to say it was the F-22. Probably 10 or so years ago, I had just started reporting on the Air Force. And I remember just kind of a press release came out, and it was like, okay, the F-22 is ready for war or whatever, and that was it. How do you envision announcing that the F-35 is going to be ready for war?
Well, and you just said the magic words. So a lot of people don't understand initial operating capability. What does that mean? We talked about that in Europe because that's a phrase that a lot of folks don't understand. It means combat capable is what it means. It could go into war if necessary. So what it actually is, it's a declaration by the commander of Air Combat Command, who is the responsible officer in this case, that this unit, these planes, are now ready, combat capable. And it's sort of a delivery, you might say, a declaration and a delivery to the Chief of Staff and to me. That is what it is from a technical standpoint. As you point out, though, there will be an announcement to the world. And so what we always do in these cases, we always first pre-brief the Congress. They're very, very interested in this program. And so that will need to occur. And then we will make an announcement to the world, and I would expect we'll have a gathering, a celebration, if you will, to commemorate this occasion, because it will be a big deal. This is the future of our fighter force. It's fifth generation, and it will be a very important aspect of taking our national defense into the future.
So how upset are you that there's no back seat for you to go for a ride?
You got to be thick-skinned in this business.
So you have a new chief of staff, a new vice chief. You have about 6 months left. What do you guys plan to do in those 6 months? What's left on the to-do list?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, General Welsh is a hard act to follow, but General Goldfein is fantastic. And General Wilson, of course, I've worked with very closely throughout my whole tenure on the nuclear enterprise. So I think we've got a fantastic team that is now in the seat on the uniform side. So for the next 6 months, my priorities are going to be the same priorities that I have had since day one. And I know General Goldfein and General Wilson absolutely agree. So those priorities are people, the people issues, taking care of people. So this is growing our Air Force. This is protecting the most important family programs, focusing on quality of life, the unit climates, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's number two is getting the right balance for our readiness of today and our modernization for tomorrow. So there's lots to talk about under that umbrella. And then third is make every dollar count. This is to say we have to look for efficiencies, which we're doing through our acquisition programs, through energy efficiencies. We've attacked headquarters spending. All of this in recognition of the fact that we're in a tight budget environment and we are stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We need to make every dollar count. So if I can help to advance the ball in those three areas over the next 6 months, then I will feel like I've made a contribution.
Let's talk about those dollars. I think next week, I believe, is the 5-year anniversary of the Budget Control Act. It's just kind of loomed over everybody, and it's kind of it nipped and chewed at things. Is the Air Force any better off now? I know the caps kind of rise in the coming years. Is the Air Force any better off than it was, say, when you came into office?
Well, I believe the answer is yes. So first of all, the BCA continues to loom over our heads, by the way, because sequestration will come back to us in FY18 unless Congress lifts it. And lifting it right down to the wire is one approach. We would dearly prefer that they lift it so that we can do appropriate planning in advance. But we'll have to see how that goes. I think the Air Force is on a better path, I will say. 5 years ago, we were still downsizing. Now we are growing in recognition of just how important our Air Force is in every engagement around the world. Everybody wants more of what we do. So I think that's a positive change. I think there have been other positive changes for our people. We have a number of modernization programs that are in the works now. 5 years ago, we had some, but fewer, and we are just around the corner to the F-35 initial combat capability. Things have been launched, so I would assert we're better off in that regard as well. The one that continues to worry me the most, where there hasn't been enough progress made, and that's readiness. So we are still in a position where roughly half of our combat air forces are not considered sufficiently ready in the eyes of our commanders for a high-end fight, meaning a fight in an anti-access aerial denial situation against a major world competitor. So that's what worries me. And in order to move the needle on that, we need to grow our Air Force, we need adequate funding, and it would be awfully good if we could get a lucky break and have a few less operations around the world. I'm not sure that's going to happen because the world gets a vote, and the world is a pretty tumultuous place.
Do you think anything will change with the budget going, even regardless of who wins the next election? We're still going to probably have a split Congress or a split White House and Congress. Do you think there'll be any progress made, or do you think this is just going to, basically the military is going to have to ride this out for the next 5 years?
I hope there will be progress made. It certainly has been a very divisive atmosphere here in Washington. It's very different than the Washington I remember, say, from the 1980s and 90s, early 90s when I was on Capitol Hill. So I certainly hope that we can move beyond some of that divisiveness and get back to the approach of let's get things done. You know, all of us, either in the executive branch, legislative branch, we're ultimately here to make accomplishments for the people that we serve. And if we can focus on that as the top priority, I would like to think we could make advancements.
One of the big bills you have coming up, which you touched on briefly, was the nuclear recapitalization. The nuclear forces pretty much all have to be redone or upgraded in the next 15 years or so. How do you foresee, with the aircraft bow wave you have, all the bills for the multitude of new aircraft that the Air Force needs to buy, how do you see nuclear fitting in? Do you see perhaps nuclear going to a separate budget, or would that be something that you would recommend perhaps as you leave this year, that the way to actually be able to afford the recapitalization?
Well, first of all, when you live off of the equipment of decades past, eventually the bill has to come due to modernize. So this is what we're coming up against, and it's true not only in the nuclear enterprise, but it's true for some of our aircraft programs. It's true across the board, and it is what it is. There's been other periods in history where this has been necessary. So I'm a big believer in the triad. I think it's really, really important. It's a lot of money, yes, but on the other hand, it's about 5 to 6% of our defense budget. That's when we get into the big spending a few years from now. So if you look at it in terms of 5 to 6%, how do we not afford that, I say, because of the importance, and it has kept the peace, the ultimate peace, I'll say, no nuclear war, for 70 years. So I believe we have to look for a way to afford it. Whether you do it off budget or not, I'm for whatever gets it done. In other words, I'm all about let's just figure out a way, compromise if necessary, and get it done. But let's remember, it's all the taxpayer dollars. But if putting it in a separate account is an approach in which we can then compromise and get it through Congress and get it signed into law, then I'm in favor of that. Certainly I'm in favor of, if it's done for one leg of the triad, the submarine force, it ought to be done for the other two legs,
the bomber force,
the bomber and the ICBM.
Yeah.
That's right.
I want to get to your questions in just a minute. I'm going to just ask one more. Wanted to ask about the IG files that I believe it was last month or a couple months ago, was announced that the files have been corrupted. They were missing, or they were unable to be recovered. All of a sudden, then they were recovered, and everyone was happy that they were recovered. Have you come any closer to finding out what happened there, and what's being done to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Well, needless to say, I was completely shocked, like I'm sure everybody else was shocked, to learn this news. And literally, I felt it was important within a day of me being told. Again, we informed the Congress, and then we put out a little public announcement about it, just because we thought the transparency was the best thing to do under those circumstances. The good news, a few days subsequent to that, was that the files actually were recovered. We put our best forensic minds on it to look to see whether it had been hacked, and we do not believe there was any hacking, nor was there any loss of important personal data. So if there's a bright light, that perhaps is the bright light. But still in all, how did this occur? Who's responsible? Who's accountable for all of this? So what I did was I asked for an independent look. An independent investigation. So there's been a team put together to do that. It's being overseen by the DOD, IG, and they have yet to come back and report. But in the meantime, I've been assured that there are now in place backup systems, so this shouldn't happen again. But I want to reserve judgment until I get that independent report result.
Okay. Questions from the audience? I guess just speak. I don't think we have a microphone, so go ahead.
So, you know, we talked about the airplanes that, or I'm sorry, the pilots that you have a shortage of. But I believe General Goldfein said you have about 4,000 shortage of maintainers as well. Do you have anything in the future to kind of keep those maintainers retained and recruit more? And also, do you know how much you're spending on contractors to kind of make up for that deficit?
You're right. We do have a shortage of maintainers, and I talked a couple of times about we're growing our Air Force, so just a few numbers overall. We're going from about 311,000 on the active duty side to 317,000 by the end of this fiscal year, which remember is September 30th. So we're just about to hopefully hit 317,000. And part of that end strength growth, a good part, is going to go to the maintenance force. So that's point one, and we're going to grow beyond that. So we project in the next time we submit a budget, we'll be going several thousand higher than that, and I think maintenance will continue to get additional end strength. By the way, it's not just a numbers situation in our maintenance force, it's also an experience level situation. And at the moment, we probably have more of the younger, less experienced maintainers and fewer of the older, more experienced maintainers, and that's where we're most short. So the way you deal with that is through bonuses and to try to help retain and once again focus on if there's quality of life issues, what can we do there to retain more people. So we have a robust program now of bonuses for our maintenance force. But truth in advertising, it's going to take us years to get out from under this because we're bringing in new people, which will just swell the ranks of the more juniors, and it will take years to season them. But we need to work on it, and so we're doing that. Contractors are part of it. I don't have absolute numbers in my memory, my head as to numbers, but we are using contractors in a variety of maintenance activities.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this. Very informative. And thank you. I'm Kathleen Delano, CEO of PMIC, and I'm very interested in your views on, while we can't get an exemption, obviously, from OMB policy, but some kind of statement that helps our people in the trenches, our people out there who are dealing with some of the bureaucratic red tape that happens when we have OMB policies and other policies that effectively have people working with one hand tied behind their back. Perhaps an encouraging word to those who are interpreting policy so that the red tape and the bureaucracy doesn't exacerbate. What I have seen in a study that I did is an exacerbation of that brain drain, and the retention problem is really sometimes quality of life, as you said, is quality of life in the office and doing red tape and paperwork as opposed to getting their jobs done. Do you have any statement that you might make?
Well, first of all, I would say I think you're absolutely right. I mentioned that part of our approach, it came up during the pilot discussion, but it really is across the board for our Air Force, and that is the so-called additional duties. So by that I mean, you know, I as a member of the Air Force, I have my job, but then in addition I have other stuff that I'm given at the unit level that I am also responsible for, and it eats up a lot of time. And it's frequently a big annoyance to the force. I've heard this over and over again as I've traveled. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take that on. And we started at home base, let's say, meaning we looked at the things we had done to ourselves, by Air Force instruction, what are some of these additional duties, and can we eliminate some of them? And so we're getting pretty close now to making an announcement to the force. This is going to impact much more the uniform force, though, than the civilian force. But we're going to announce the elimination of some of these additional duties. Now, it won't be the be-all and end-all. It's tranche one, but we then have to look at some things that are required by law that we can go back to Congress and see if we can change, or perhaps OPM, or perhaps OSD. So this is going to be step one, and there'll be more to follow.
Like, what will you be eliminating?
Well, if I told you that, I'd have to eliminate you, Marcus.
I'll just take another question from the audience. The second row, please.
Good morning, Secretary James. I'm Cadet Fontalvo. I'm from UNC Chapel Hill. I heard that the Air Force is trying to grow the reserve force, and they're looking to recruit from ROTC directly. I was wondering if you could speak on that program. As a cadet myself, I'm interested in how that program will work.
Well, everything we do in the Air Force is total force. So you heard me a couple of times say, like in the world of the RPAs, we're using our Guard and Reserve. Believe me, we're using our Guard and Reserve integrated in all of our areas. So literally, we don't go anywhere these days without our Guard and Reserve. So as you point out, I think it was last year for the first time we opened up ROTC to be able to do some of that service directly into the reserve components. Now, truth in advertising, I think would prefer to have the initial ROTC on active duty as much as we possibly can, but at least for now that program is still open. And obviously, whether you start on active duty or not, if you then are leaving active duty, we always want you to consider continuing your service in the Guard and Reserve, because again, we're total force. The training is the same. It's a great deal across the board.
Questions?
Go Duke.
Sorry. Rob. Colin.
Morning, Colin Clark, Breaking Defense. You're looking at two additional aircraft now for close air support. I know it's pre-decisional, but you've started talking to the outside world. So where are you going to find the money? And why the second aircraft, the prop?
So far I have read about this in the news. I have not actually seen a proposal on any of this that has come forward to me. So it for sure is pre-decisional. It hasn't been decided on. You just put your finger on it. Where would we get the money? Not at all clear to me. But what is clear to me is that we are very, very committed to close air support as a mission in the United States Air Force. And we got the backs of the people on the ground who need that mission performed. So I'm just going to await to see whatever this proposal is to come forward. But of course, the money is the important thing, and we have the A-10, we have the F-16. You're aware of all the different aircraft who are able to perform closed air support, and the main message I want to put forth is we've got the backs of the people on the ground.
Are you worried that this raises questions about the F-35's effectiveness as a CAS platform?
No, I'm not worried about that at all. And of course, part of the declaration of the initial combat capability, the IOC, is that the F-35 can do the CAS missions that were designated as required as part of IOC. Not the full-up CAS, but what's called the limited CAS.
Questions? Yeah, on the back.
During the past several months, Senator John McCain on the Senate floor during talks about the authorization for the Department of Defense has talked about the Air Force cannibalizing old planes for maintenance. Can you speak on that? Is that exaggerated, or I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that issue.
It's not, the notion of cannibalizing planes certainly occurs. We do it, and as far as I know, the other services do it as well. Now, you might wonder, why would we do that? And the answer is, some of these aircraft now have gotten to the point, they're aging out, and the manufacturer literally may not be making the spare parts anymore. And so we have to take the parts off of one plane in order to keep the other plane flying. It essentially boils down to that. So it goes to the age of the force. It goes to the importance of we need to modernize. And of course, until we can get modernized, it means we have to keep the supply chain as best as we can robust enough so that we can have access to the spare parts and minimize the cannibalization. But I don't foresee that we're going to be able to stop doing that altogether simply because some of the aircraft are that old.
The back on the aisle.
Good morning. I know with the situation in Turkey, it's quite fluid, and there are still some uncertainties going in with how airmen are going to be operating in the next few weeks, given the hostilities there. Is there a plan to move airmen in a more, is there a concrete way to move airmen who are going to be setting mission sets there? I know we're conducting strikes against ISIS from there. Is there a plan from the Defense Department or from the Air Force as to how airmen will be moving in for their missions in the near future?
Well, first of all, I had the occasion to speak to the commander at Incirlik yesterday, just because I wanted to inquire directly about our people and how it was going. And there is no plan to move out of Incirlik whatsoever. In fact, it was reported to me that our people are doing well. During the week when the power was cut, we did have backup generators, of course. There was not enough reserve fuel, however, and so for the first few days, there was the decision made that the most important buildings would be powered, the mission essential buildings would be powered, but not all buildings. And the biggest impact there was sometimes people would move cots and so on into some of their workspaces because of the air conditioning situation. That was probably the biggest hardship, was the lack of air conditioning and the extreme heat. But the food, the water, all other things, internet was all operating even during this week. So, of course, the families left back in March. We're down to strictly our airmen, both military and civilian. The commander reported to me that the Turks who are also on the base, this is a Turkish base after all, they have been, the relationship has been fine. There's been no problems with our people. It's been professional. And so obviously this is something that we are monitoring closely, but for now, steady as she goes. The operations, the missions are ongoing, steady as she goes.
The back.
Hi, Lee John Greco, Flight Global. I wanted to ask another quick CAS question. Has the Air Force officially thrown out the idea of using the TX trainer for a dual light attack and trainer mission, or dual CAS mission?
So I'm not aware that that really ever was an idea on the table. In other words, the TX is to be a trainer. You're saying, have we thrown out the idea of using it as a trainer and as a CAS platform? Was that your question?
Yes, I understand from industry, and Readiness specifically mentioned this at Farnborough, that the Air Force was talking with them about looking at a CAS mission for training.
Well, that must be another one of those pre-decisional areas that they haven't brought to me yet, because I'm not aware of that. We're very focused on the future of the trainer force. Matter of fact, probably later today, the next draft of the TX will be going out to industry. And by the way, in my opinion, I believe that this has been an unprecedented level of discussion on requirements with industry about both the baseline requirements as well as what are considered the higher level requirements, because what we want to do is a cost capability analysis and trade-off. So I think at the end of the day, when we do the final RFP, which should be by December timeframe, we should have a really good grasp on how we're going to do this cost capability analysis for the TX. And that was one of the initiatives, if you think back, that was part of our bending the cost curve, our acquisition reform approaches that we in the Air Force have been proceeding with.
I've got a quick follow-up to that. Do you see the acquisition priorities changing now that you have, the tanker hopefully doing okay, the F-35 kind of moving on? Do you envision any type of change in the Air Force's acquisition priorities moving forward before you leave?
I do not envision a change in direction or a change in strategy. As programs proceed, of course, it's execution, 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 and they're at different levels of development and production. We've also got to get going on the TX. We have to get going on the J-Stars. So all of these programs are in the mix. I do not foresee any kind of a major shift of strategy or priority.
Get the aisle, then we'll go over there.
Hi, Valerie Insina with Defense News. I wanted to quickly get back to the KC-46. Boeing's set to announce tomorrow that they've got another, I think, like $339 million cost overrun on that program, and so that brings them up to almost $2 billion that they're going to have to eat out of their own profit. And development for the aircraft was only set for about like $5 billion that the Air Force is paying for. Does that raise any concerns to you in terms of fixed price contracts, or is this sort of a successful use case in your mind? And are there any worries that Boeing might not want to move on to later stages of production if they're losing so much profit?
Well, in all of my discussions with Boeing at senior levels, they at all junctures assure me that they are steadfastly behind this program, and I believe that to be true. I also believe that although there have been cost overruns, that the profitability will certainly increase once it gets into production, and particularly once foreign sales start to be obtainable for Boeing. So there is a way over time to make this up. But I think they have always assured me, and I absolutely believe it, that they stand with us on this program. I think what it demonstrates is integration is a difficult task. This turned out to be more complex, I think, than originally believed to be the case. But we're working through it together. And in terms of the fixed price nature of the contract, I think it has been successful in this case, but be careful, because one size doesn't fit all. And we have had fixed price development disasters in our history. It just depends. And the fact that there is this aftermarket, or not aftermarket, but there are the foreign sales in the offing, they are using a commercial derivative aircraft and so on, these elements allowed for this deal to work in a fixed price environment. Fixed price would not be a good deal in other types of environments.
Hi, Laura Seligman with Aviation Week. So speaking of pilot training and readiness, I understand that the Air Force is looking to the private sector to fill a capability gap in red air aggressor aircraft. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this would work exactly. What aircraft are you going to use? Is this cost effective? And is this sort of just putting a Band-Aid on the problem as opposed to addressing the root issue? So if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, that would be great.
So that is something that is actively under consideration. It is done in other countries, and so the red air aggressors, of course, are those that our pilots would fly against, and they would essentially simulate an enemy aircraft engagement. And so it is a training approach that could well work. So we have to see how the dollars and cents work out. And then we'll have more to say about that when the time comes. But it's, again, that's another pre-decisional, but at least it's one I know about because it is actively under discussion.
Justin on the end.
Thanks. Justin Johnson with the Heritage Foundation. Secretary James, you and the chiefs, the other service secretaries have all been very clear about the readiness challenges you're facing across each of the services. What I think is a little bit interesting, perhaps, is that Secretary Carter and Secretary Work are not talking about readiness. Is there a gap there, or are they just focused on other things?
Well, I actually have heard them talk a lot about readiness. They're concerned about it. I think we're all frustrated that although we feel we're putting the right amount of dollars in the right places in our budget, we're not seeing a real movement of the needle toward higher levels of high-end readiness. On readiness, if I could just take a moment and say it's always important when we talk about readiness to say ready for what. So if the question is, are we ready to do the types of missions that we're doing in the Middle East right now against ISIL, the answer is you better believe it. We're very adept at this. We put fully manned units forward. It's the best of the best, and they're accomplishing the mission in a great way. But then if you say, well, are you ready to go into an anti-access aerial denial environment against a major competitor, a major nation state somewhere else in the world, the answer is, I get anyway, is 50% of our combat air forces have that degree of readiness. So that's not good enough. I don't like that. I wish we could do better. But part of it is we're so small and our people are so engaged, we literally can't free them up enough time to go through the rotational training to practice against these high-end threats. So that's another reason why I say, number one, we have got to grow our Air Force.
Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick Tucker, Defense One. Air Force is looking to decrease our strategic vulnerability on the global positioning system, and one aspect of that is new ground control stations. You've realized some cost overruns on the OCX program. Where are you on new cost projections for that program, and can you describe how essential that program is for national security and decreasing vulnerability of the global positioning system? Thanks.
Well, being able to operate in a highly, highly secure way, our GPS constellation is extremely important to our national security. And it would be an understatement, I suppose, to say that I'm really disappointed with the way the OCX has gone over time. It's a variety of reasons why we are where we are, to include not understanding perhaps the cyber requirements, maybe not having the A-team on the program at the beginning. I recently, within the last couple of weeks, declared a non-McCurdy on this program, which means the cost overrun was such that it triggered reporting requirements to the Congress. In the meantime, Frank Kendall and I and some members of our team have been conducting deep dive sessions on the OCX every 3 months or so. We just had another one a few weeks back. There was progress, so that's good. Is it enough progress? I'd like to see more. We'll have another deep dive at 3 more months approximately from now, and also at about that same time frame, we're going to have to figure out, are we going forward with this, and how so? We'll have to re-baseline the program, replan it, or go in a different direction. So that will be a decision for the fall.
All right, we got time for about 2 more. Pat.
Thanks. I'm Pat Hose with Defense Daily. The Air Force signed that CRADA with Textron for Scorpion. This is the first time the Air Force has entered in such an arrangement. I'm wondering, is Textron paying the Air Force for this? What does the Air Force get out of it? And have any other companies approached you for a similar relationship prior?
So yes, we have, I don't know, 6 or 7 perhaps in the pipeline who are looking for similar arrangements. The way this whole thing started was as part of bending the cost curve and the discussions that we have with industry, where we each bring issues to the table and we figure out things to work on together to advance the ball in one way, shape, or form. It came up that it would be very helpful to have some sort of accreditation from the U.S. government to help with foreign sales. And so, yes, they're paying us for this. It's going to be using some of our expertise. It will be funded by the company, in this case, Textron, but as I said, there will be others down the pike as well. And certainly, foreign military sales and our partnerships around the world are crucial to our military-to-military relationships and to the foreign policy of the United States. So we see this as a win-win.
All right, this is one in the back, Courtney.
Hi, ma'am. You talked a little bit about the still looming sequestration. In the near term, it looks like there's probably going to be another continuing resolution. Can you talk a little bit about the areas you're most concerned about if there is a continuing resolution? And then more specifically, what modernization efforts do you think will be most impacted by a continuing resolution?
Well, I will say I think you're right. This is what most people seem to believe now. There's still, I guess, some hope that it won't be the case. But like in most years, we will probably face a continuing resolution at least for several months. I hate to say it, but we've become pretty good at managing through a couple of months' worth of a continuing resolution. But what would really be bad is a long-term or full-year continuing resolution. So if that were to occur, that would put us $1.3 billion in the hole vis-a-vis what our FY17 budget should have been. So that's real money, $1.3 billion. There would be something, I don't have a full list of all of the new starts that could be affected, but I think as most people know, you can't do a new start under a continuing resolution. So there's between 50 and 60 programs. Now, they're not all huge programs. In fact, most of them are smaller programs, but that's the kind of impact I'm being told we would see under a full year CR. We would be held to the munitions levels of the previous year, and here we are in the middle of a war effort, and the munitions level would be held constant at a time where it needs to grow. There would be other procurement increases or decreases that would also be affected.
It's like the F-35 ramping up.
So the point is, a long-term CR is a bad deal, and that's a message that we have to continue, and we will continue to press with our Congress.
So I want to ask you one last question. We're just about out of time. You mentioned the munitions shortfall. I know that there's all the sensitivity about saying how low is it, but everyone has been talking about this now for six months or so. How bad is it?
We have enough munitions to prosecute the war effort. Now keep in mind, we have munitions that are designated for one part of the geography of the world. We also have munitions that may be designated for another part of the world, and there may be a requirement to shift things around. If we start running short in one, we may have to take temporarily from another. As military planners, we like to have the full amount in reserves at all times, everywhere. That has not been the case. Obviously, we've had to shift some things around, but we've also worked with industry, we've worked with the Congress, and we've gotten the ability to, or we've gotten the permission to ramp up some of these munitions purchases, and industry has worked also to do what they need to do to be able to ramp up. So as long as we don't end up with a CR, as long as we don't end up with sequestration, if we can just stay on the path that we're on right now, I think we're going to be fine.
Okay, great. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Secretary James for taking time out of her busy schedule to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.